Stephen Shepard on this, campaigns editor with Politico. He joins us now. Stephen, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's talk about a couple of the Democrats calling the president either a white supremacist or a white nationalist. What did you make of this? It's almost getting to be the point where it's across the board.
Well, it certainly, I think, is a more extraordinary moment than the way we portray it sometimes. You know, we're so focused on giving you one side and giving you the other side. And I think voters at home look at it almost like a tennis match in which their heads move from one side to the other and don't really process what they're hearing. You could say that there were similar things in 2016 in the way the campaign was framed with some of the warnings that Hillary Clinton had given. Look, this is clearly a traumatic week here in the States. And you're seeing a lot of folks who do feel like the president either harbors some views that might be dangerous, or at least has given rhetorical aid and comfort to people who might have those views, some of whom, whether it's a result of mental illness or just malevolence, may take violent action like what we saw this weekend.
You know, what was interesting, you mentioned Hillary Clinton sort of ringing the bell on this a couple of years ago, but I think people were much more careful about using the words and going there at the time. Now, 2 years later, it's almost like people have seen enough examples of Trump crossing the line that they think, yeah, I'm going to go there, and then the next person and the next person all decide the same thing. I'm going to go there.
I think that's right. I think we have seen some, or at least these Democrats feel like they've seen enough evidence during the first 3 years of Trump's presidency to feel, or 2.5 years, to feel more comfortable going there. I'd also add that these are all Democrats who are competing for the Democratic presidential nomination. They want to talk to Democratic voters, especially right now. I'm not saying that they're using this necessarily as a campaign issue to jockey with one another, but these are the kinds of people that they're talking to when they go on television or when they go out on the stump in Iowa. And so that's an important context for what's going on right now.
All right, let's talk for a moment about the mayors. Now, a couple hundred mayors in the U.S. calling for the background checks bill to get passed and calling for Senate to come back and do that. Is there any indication that the Senate will get recalled?
No, there's no indication that the Senate will be coming back to Washington before Labor Day. Mitch McConnell, who's currently laid up with an injury back in Kentucky, doesn't seem like he's willing to bring the Senate back. Now, I will say that the president has talked about there might be some willingness among congressional leaders, and he's been in touch with congressional leaders about a background checks bill. But we've actually heard this before, and nothing has happened, whether that's been a lack of will from the White House or from Republicans in Congress. And these are things, background checks are almost universally popular in the United States. Our new poll found nearly 90% of voters think that background checks should be required for all gun purchases. And it's difficult to get 90% of Americans to agree on anything. So this is almost unanimously popular here.
You looked in that poll as well on the kinds of weapons that could get banned and how much support there is for that. Tell me a little bit about what you found.
Yeah, roughly 7 in 10 voters actually favor an assault weapons ban, including a narrow majority of Republican voters. That's something, the assault weapons ban was passed here during the Clinton administration in the early to mid-90s and was allowed to lapse during George W. Bush's administration and was never reimposed. There's zero evidence that Republicans in Congress are willing to do that, even if their voters back home might be okay with it. That may be an issue of intensity. I think it's also framed in Republican politics. It's good to stand up for the Second Amendment and for the right to bear arms. And anything that infringes on that, even if it's popular among Republicans, that's become a litmus test in Republican politics over the past couple of decades. And it's difficult to see how there would be any progress on that, at least as long as Republicans control 2 out of the 3 branches of at least the legislative process between the Senate and the White House.
Okay, so let me ask you, as a comparison goes, because you said there was a bill years ago that did get through but then lapsed. Do you think support for banning certain kinds of weapons has grown, or the support has always been there? I'm just trying to figure out if there has been a change or a dramatic uptick in support for seeing some sort of ban. Well,
we've actually tracked questions about the assault weapons ban and found that it's pretty consistent, though we do see some modest increases or spikes around these sorts of tragic and traumatic events like mass shootings. So I would say that these, banning assault weapons has always been at least moderately popular. That said, a lot of folks, Bill Clinton talks about how he thinks it contributed to Democrats losing the House of Representatives in 1994, the assault weapons ban just before that election, how he thinks it contributed to a lot of Democrats in maybe more rural or suburban districts losing their reelection campaigns. And Democrats have been nervous about touching the third rail of gun politics in the intervening 25 years. That said, I think this year we're seeing, at least in the Democratic presidential nomination, a far greater willingness. Both you talked about confronting President Trump on the issue of race and his perceived coddling of white supremacists, but you're also seeing that on guns. Almost the entire Democratic field is willing to go there when it comes to banning assault weapons and instituting stricter gun control laws.
Interesting. All right, Stephen Shepard, I've got to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.